this community felt so similar to one that I'd grown up in and a culture that I'd grown up in, and plus we had the shared experience of addiction. That was often a thing I would bring up to people from the get-go, especially the adults, the parents and the people my age. I would talk about my own experience living with addiction, and that was like an instant connection.
The library was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
I'm going to read a couple of passages from the novel before Jason and I talk. I guess I should introduce it a little bit. I started out thinking I was going to write a full-on true crime book, a nonfiction true crime American book, about a crime that took place in northern Minnesota while I was living there in 2019. The crime involved 3 teenagers who kidnapped an older acquaintance and shot him in the woods. I started researching the crime, and it involved going to the town where the crime took place. And as I got into it, I realized 2 things. The first was it didn't have the makings of a traditional true crime book, because true crime always pivots on plot, psychology, motive. Who did it? Why did they do it? How did we come to this point? This was a very 21st century kind of crime. There was no motive. Nobody could say why they did it, how they did it. It just happened. And drugs were involved, methamphetamine, which is a huge drug in the area. As I got into the research, I learned how incredibly overwhelmed the community is by methamphetamine use, especially with kids. So given that I didn't have really the makings of a full true crime book, I started to look for connections, things that would help me understand these people and their situations better. And I had thought, for most people when they start writing, the first novel is traditionally the novel of one's family, one's childhood growing up. And I never did that. I started writing a little later in life and right out of the gate, but I never touched anything to do with my family or the town that we lived in. And I was overwhelmed by the similarities between the 2 towns, the one that I had grown up in blue-collar Connecticut, and this town on the Iron Range. And this seemed to be the opportunity to write something about my parents' lives and my family, as I'd always wanted to do. And I realized then, as I got further into it, that there was this incredible sweep. You could say that it's the book became this attempt to create a modest working-class epic of American life. From my parents growing up in the Bronx in the middle of the 20th century to the world of the kids now in northern Minnesota. So the book takes place in 3 parts, 3 very different eras. I'm going to read a little bit from part 1, Kat, my character's childhood, and a little bit from part 3 about the girl Brittany who committed the crime, or co-committed the crime. When St. Andrew's Church co-sponsored an ecumenical teach-in event about racial equality and justice, Emma, the mother, saw it as a chance to reconnect with her older daughter, Catherine. Catherine, she knew, cared deeply about politics. The main speaker would be Henry Harris Bowen, a brilliant young man from Harlem who just arrived to head up the Bridgeport SNCC. Pleased with herself, Emma bought 2 tickets and planned it as a mother-daughter outing. Finally, she was doing something Catherine might look up to. The auditorium that night at Calf Penn Meadow Elementary School was almost 2/3 full, a larger audience than Emma was expecting, frankly, for a meeting of this kind in Milford. Father Luke introduced Rabbi Stein from Beth Shalom, and Rabbi Stein introduced the speaker. Without even thanking the rabbi, Henry Bowen surveyed the all-white audience of Episcopalians and Jews and proceeded to excoriate them. It is a sign, he said, the Black Power movement has finally arrived, when even the most privileged white communities are moved to educate themselves about the bloody racial history of this country and America's systemic absolute oppression of Black and brown people. Bowen went on to present a formidable and heart-wrenching list of facts about Black life in Bridgeport: the child poverty and illiteracy, the racist NIMBY opposition to housing, the shocking overcrowding of families in substandard housing, and the historical exclusion of Black workers by Irish-led trade unions. A stunned hush descended on the room when he finished speaking. Finally, Rabbi Stein asked if there were any questions. To her own surprise, Emma stood up. "What you described," she said, "well, it's just terrible. I sympathize with your plight, and I'm ashamed of Bridgeport, but, well, is there anything we here in Milford can do to help? What are your suggestions?" "Lady," he said, "we're not looking for your sympathy, and we don't need your help. That's the whole problem with white liberals. They are so full of sympathy. We're talking about Black power and autonomy. We're talking about some deep systemic change here." Even Kat was shocked. Sitting down, blushing furiously, Emma wondered if her stepfather, Pat Kelly, had been right when he ridiculed her for collecting money for war orphans and the children of the striking coal miners. "What are you?" he scoffed. "The Lady Bountiful? These people don't give two shits about you. Everyone looks out for themselves and maybe their families, and anyone who pretends otherwise is gaming you. If you were as smart as you think, you'd hold on to your money." What had happened to America? Nothing new, but to Emma, it had become almost unbearable. That summer, Kat found a job harvesting tobacco on one of the small farms out by Wheeler's Farm Road. The only American worker on site, Kat took her place in the fields among a group of men who'd been brought up from the Dominican Republic. The men taught her how to chop and top the tall tobacco plants. By the third or fourth day, she was picking fast enough not to get fired. After work, they gathered in the bunkhouse to drink wine, play guitars, even sing. This seemed like an excellent opportunity to learn Spanish. Maybe she could move to Mexico or Cuba. Friends from church spotted Catherine after work with her thumb out on the roadside. Instead of confronting Catherine again, Emma decided to pick her up after work. When she arrived at the farm, a foreman led her to the bunkhouse, where she saw her barely teenage daughter sitting cross-legged on the floor with a room full of single men drinking cheap red wine out of jelly glasses. This was too much. Was Catherine trying to get raped? For the first time since she could remember when, Emma dared to be parental. "Catherine, get your pay. You're coming home with me right now." Okay. Skipping ahead, almost 50 years. We're in the world of Brittany, who's in her bedroom doing sex cam stuff on her phone. "Do you cheat?" Justin Cole messaged Brittany. Her name on LiveMe was Cherry, from his mom's basement in Biwabik. "No, but I work." "What you mean, what kind of work?" "Duh, what kind of work do you think we're talking about?" Brittany thinks. But instead, she texts back, "I blow glass," which she actually does. She has a friend with a bench and a blowtorch. "I'm a personal care attendant," a thing she'd set up with her grandma Dee, 140 from the state, which of course they'd split. "And I also sleep with people for shit." "Okay, if we were together, would you ever do that knowing you're with me?" Justin Cole wants to know. Clearly he doesn't mean personal care. What is his point? Does he think they're dating? "I would let you know, but cash is cash to me," she texted back, and then shut down the app. This guy seemed even more stupid than most. Misty was gone, and she was alone, restless and anxious. She tried calling Micah's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She wondered where he was now and what he was doing. "What you doing?" she messaged. Maybe he was home in the basement of Crystal and Quentin's new house 2 blocks away, where he'd set up his room. The Wi-Fi there wasn't great. A half hour later, Micah messaged her back. "Everything good. Sorry, phone died." "I figured." The 20 Brant gave me fell out my pocket. Now I can't re-up until tomorrow. He was messaging her from his room. A twin bed and blankets pushed up against the cold cellar wall to turn it into a sofa. He had his mom's gun that she kept in a brown paper bag on the fridge and his own black nylon holster. I'm having the worst day. I'm sorry, love. I just really want to shoot someone. It's a figure of speech. It doesn't alarm her. Micah is a wannabe thug. Part of him truly believes he's on the verge of being invited to join the Minneapolis branch of Gangster Disciples, but he also calls himself Pineapple Man from the Dumb Stoner movie he watched with his biological dad when he was 8. That can't be your go-to every time you're upset. Micah, Brittany knows, is an innocent soul. He'd do anything in the world to protect his siblings and mom, but it helps the anger go away. Yeah, so does sex. True, but you're grounded. Upstairs, Crystal and Quentin were watching TV with Micah's younger siblings, Paisley and Zeke, and his half-baby sister, Cheyenne. Micah's family had split almost in half when his mom and ex-stepdad, Pete King, divorced a year ago. Pete had moved back to the cities with his new fiancée, Crystal's former best friend, and the 2 other kids he and Crystal had. Micah couldn't be bothered going upstairs, so we messaged Crystal. I'm having Brittany come over. Everyone can criticize, but I love her. Nothing came back. And she makes me happy. He waited a moment, then typed, and I need happy now. I'm really getting depressed. It's okay if she makes you happy, Crystal replied. You got 2 G's, Micah messaged his mother. Yeah. Can I sell it? Pause. Give you the money? Yeah, I guess. Later that night, when her parents were in their converted garage drinking with some of her dad's friends, Brittany slipped out and walked to Micah's house. They hung out and smoked weed with his mom and Quentin and his sister Paisley. When Brittany left to walk home at 1, everyone at Micah's was still up, except for the baby, Cheyenne. Thank you.
This is such a tough, bleak, complicated, and powerful book.
Oh, wait a second.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. How did it feel to write? Because it's such a tough, painful book. Like there's so much grief and despair in the book. How did it feel to write?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of the question.
I'm sorry. It was such a tough, painful book full of grief and despair. How did it feel to write?
Can I see the sheet?
Sure.
I took the wrong sheet with me.
That's
I'm
okay.
sorry.
That's okay. No, just sorry, sorry, folks.
Oh, yeah. I'm describing the novel.
Well, no. Just how did it feel for you as a writer to go through these? Because you went through your childhood, which you had never written about before. You write about your then partner, who's named Paul in the book,
Yes.
and the cycle of addiction that he goes through. There's a lot of pain in the book. Like there's your parents' pain, your pain as an adolescent, the pain of the characters who were involved in the murder. How did it feel for you to write?
How did it feel to write it?
Yeah.
Well, different. I mean, of course, it's hard. Like writing any book is hard. But I mean, obviously the first 2 parts of the book were very familiar ground for me. My writing usually comes from around the immediate circumference of my life. And I'm writing first about my family, my parents' lives, and then about my partner, ex-partner, his struggle with addiction. Those things were very close to me. But the kids, getting to know the kids in their world, that was quite a stretch. Even though I've been living up around northern Minnesota for a while, certainly the cabin cottage world that I was in 20 miles out of the town, going on the bike trail in the lake was a very different world than the world of the kids living in these kind of hollowed out former mining towns. So getting to know them and people in the community and getting them to trust me, That was a stretch. I mean, it was really worth it, and it worked out, but it was 2.5 years.
And you said earlier, and when you were introducing the book, that this is the first time you wrote about your childhood ever in your books, but you wanted to do that for a while. What prevented you from writing about your childhood
From writing
before?
about my family?
Yeah.
Well, my parents' lives, I mean, as you'll see if you read the book, had a lot of illusion. You know, illusion was very central to the kind of family, family story. My father was from the Bronx, was Jewish from the Bronx, and had an English accent, even though he'd never been to the UK. I mean, he was a total Anglophile, and he worked in the warehouse of a university press, and he would have people believe that he was an editor there. So they had all these my father had all these pretensions to this life that was completely alien to our family, and my mother, to a great degree, kind of supported and enabled it. It was a whole little system within the family. So that never really stopped. They maintained that for their entire lives, and they were great readers. They've read all my books. But so long as my parents were alive, it would be just too hurtful to write truthfully about these illusions. So I just knew I couldn't do it. My parents had both died within, half decade or so of when I began writing the book. And I thought, well, okay, that's the time to do it. And it seemed important because I was so struck by the difference between their lives in the aspirational working class Bronx of the mid-20th century and the lives of these people today on the Iron Range. And I really wanted to, there was two purposes. One was to tell the story of my parents' lives, but the other was to tell a bigger story about how kind of American working class life has changed to underclass life in the 21st century.
How has it changed?
Well, I mean, in the community of Harding, where the crime took place, both Brittany's parents were married, and all three children were from the same parents, had the same biological parents. That's already exceptional. Most of the kids refer to my long ago bio dad. All of the kids involved in this crime, except for Brittany, had been in and out of foster care, and she'd been in and out of juvie because of her meth addiction. But just the fact that they were married and both worked full time made them middle class relatively in Harding because there's so few jobs. I interviewed people at the school, and they had a new principal who had just come on in the last year, and she really kind of caught on to it. She was like, hey, we're in a different world now, and more than half the kids do not have parents who have stable employment, and the needs are completely different, and she really revamped what the school was doing to better suit the needs of the kids from where they were coming from, where they were at. It's a very different, my mother's favorite subjects in public school were Latin and French, and the kids don't even go to school,
Yeah. When you first learned about the murder in Harding,
Concerned about?
when you first learned about the murder,
Yeah.
when you first read about it, you read about it in the newspaper,
Yeah.
right? That was the first time you
When
learned about it.
When I first read about the
Yeah.
murder, what interested
What,
me?
yeah, what was so compelling about it to you? 'Cause-
Well, I didn't know when I first read about the murder how common it was.
right, yeah. 'Cause,
And how many murders of the same kind were committed up there. But what grabbed me initially was the durational aspect of it. They didn't just kill him. There was a drive-by shooting on the same street. 2 weeks before, on Christmas Day, there was a drive-by shooting 3 doors from where the kids kidnapped the guy. But the fact that they spent this time together, that seemed very cinematic to me, like it might lend itself to learning something about the lives of these people, beyond the crime. So I was very curious. They spent the day together. What did they do all day? Who were they? What did they talk about? What did they do? And, at first I thought maybe it was some kind of, grandiose kind of psychological torture, mind game kind of kidnapping. But of course that wasn't really how it happened. It was just they were all getting high together, and the high wore off, and then they went to another place to buy more drugs, and they got high there, and like that. But as I researched it, I talked to the police as well, and all of the kids, all of their peers. There had been 3 violent murders, all involving teenagers and all involving methamphetamine, within 5 years of each other. So everybody in the graduating high school class of 2020 on the Iron Range knew someone who was involved in one of these very, very gruesome, senseless murders.
Could you talk a little bit about why you moved to Minnesota? Like, what drew you there to the state? Why you moved to Minnesota? Because you live in Los Angeles most of the time, but you moved to Minnesota.
Right.
What drew you to this
what
to the
brought
state?
me to
Yeah,
Minnesota? I started going there in 2009 when I was working on a book, because my partner, the Paul character in the book, the Paul Garcia character, was going back to school to do a master's degree in addiction studies at Hazelden Betty Ford. And I was working on a novel then, so I thought, well, I'll take the year off from teaching, and I'll just go there and work on the book, and it'll be an adventure. And I've always been really drawn to the North, and I have read about the great North Woods of Minnesota. And that summer I found, looked on Craigslist, see if I could go up there and rent a cabin. And I found one, and it was so great. There was no Wi-Fi, there was no cell service, and I got so much work done. So I went back the following year, and this lady didn't use her cabin anymore. She lived in South Dakota. So for 4 years, I went back to write every summer. And by the 5th summer, I thought, maybe I get my own cabin and keep my books and not have to drag everything every summer. So my partner and I bought a cabin. And when things started going south for him with his addiction, he moved up there thinking it would be easier to, be drinking at night and on the weekend and hold down a job. So for a while he was back and forth in recovery, not sober, he was living up there full time. And while we were together, whenever I wasn't teaching, I would go up there. So we had a whole life there.
I mean, that part of the book is quite it's quite a significant portion of the second section of the book. You capturing the kind of tedium of that cycle of relapse, recovery, and you as the partner of an addict living through that and enduring it. Like, it is quite oppressive, I think, the way it conveys the oppression of that situation to the reader very clearly. What did you want to convey about being the partner of an addict? What was important? What was important to you?
I realized, actually, while I was living through that experience, I realized how underrepresented that experience is. There's a million books about addiction and recovery, but very few accounts of what addiction does to the people in its orbit, to the spouses and the friends and the family members. I mean, I looked for resources myself at that time personally, and I wasn't finding them. So as I was writing the story of his addiction, I was very mindful of the fact that, it was a chance maybe to speak about this experience of what the vortex of addiction does to the people around it, how it sucks everyone in, and that this would conceivably be helpful to people who were living through the same experience. So that was definitely part of the readership that I was hoping to reach with this book. Definitely it's a little different from my other books. It's the first one that I published initially with a commercial publisher rather than with Semiotext. And certainly part of my hope with the book was that I would reach a larger audience outside the art world and more normal people, because everyone in the U.S. knows someone who's involved with addiction. It's a very universal experience.
Absolutely, yeah. You write at a certain point in the book that it was about the murder. It was clearly a book that had to be written, and if she being Kat, didn't write it, who would? Did you feel any apprehension about making such a claim? Like, you're an outsider to that community. You're coming in, investigating the murder of a group, involving people that you had no connection to at all. I imagine you would experience some hostility or suspicion from the community?
I didn't. I mean, you're either going to write about yourself or you're going to write about other people, right? Sure. And if you're writing about other people, you need to get to know them. You need to know some research so that you have something to say about them. I mean, granted, there are certain communities that maybe I would not feel comfortable approaching, but this community felt so similar to one that I'd grown up in and a culture that I'd grown up in, you know, that no, and plus we had the shared experience of addiction. That was often a thing I would bring up to people from the get-go, especially the adults, you know, the parents and the people my age. I would talk about my own experience living with addiction, and that was like an instant connection. Everybody knew that.
And Paul himself, you know, he smokes meth, right? I think towards the end of the book. Anyway, never mind. Why not write, and you sort of touched on this in your introduction, but why not write an entire straight up nonfiction account of these murders? Why did you feel compelled to, I mean, you talked about the connections you felt to the kids involved in the murder, connections to your own childhood, and to the place that you grew up in. But why, I mean, you talk a lot in the third section about your investigation of the murder, about your speaking with reporters, speaking with the police. Why not write like a complete book about the murders?
Oh, yes. Why didn't it work out to be a true crime book?
Yeah.
Well, a little bit like what I was saying, you know, just before the reading, there wasn't the elements there that people want from a true crime book. You know, you want motive, you want plot, you want psychology, you want drama. And it wasn't like that. It was a much more contemporary, senseless thing that involved drugs.
But you felt,
I also didn't feel people were not that communicative, especially the kids. I reached out to them right away. They were in prison immediately because like 2 hours after killing the guy, they go to the gas station and buy Monster energy drinks with his EBT card. So how long do you think it took the police to figure out who did it? There was not like a long process of detection going on there. They picked them up the next day. So I started communicating with the kids right away when they were in jail and prison, but they didn't remember anything. You know, the first response would be, I don't know, and then the second response would be, I can't remember. And that's like, you know, it was interesting. The girl who was the best friend, her name in the book is Misty. She was the best friend of Brittany and the girlfriend of the accomplice. She prided herself. She'd never been in trouble, but she prided on herself on like her motto was don't snitch, don't tell, don't say anything. And this was really like a foundational belief, I think, across the board with the kids in that culture. Don't snitch, don't talk, don't tell. I know that my partner, the Paul Garcia character in the book, when he was working as a therapist with these kids, he was working in a juvenile detention center in one of these towns, and it was torture for him because they'd have a 45-minute session and the kids would not talk. Don't snitch, don't talk, don't tell. I mean, no matter which way he went at it, nobody wanted to talk with him. Eventually, I got a little further in my communication with the kids, and it seemed to me that because of the trauma they've experienced throughout their lives and because of the drug use and the alcohol use, you know, there were like two modes, you know. One was numb, where you don't feel anything, and one was on, where you feel everything all at once, you know, and things just explode. And that accounts for a lot of the violent crimes, all the police reports. You know, I was able to construct the biographies of the kids, what they couldn't remember or didn't want to tell me, I was able to construct by getting the police reports, not of this crime, but of the 5 years before the crime, because these people had regular contact, regular arrests, regular police encounters. And the police, of course, have a great memory. They document everything, who, what, when, where, why. The police know it all. But I didn't feel that I had that kind of psychological access that you need to really create a character drama that makes a real nonfiction novel in the tradition of In Cold Blood or The Executioner's Song. I just didn't have that.
Fair. But you did feel, though, you said when you were introducing the book, a kinship with Brittany, who was one of the murderers. So you felt some kind of psychological connection to her. What did you see in her that reminded her of you as an adolescent? Sorry, it's not in there. It's not in the question. Sorry. So when you said you felt a kinship with Brittany,
Yes.
like some connection to Brittany, and how it reminded you of her.
Yes.
Or sorry, she reminded you of yourself as an
Yeah.
adolescent. What did you see in her psychologically?
Well,
'Cause
I mean, we were almost like the same girl, separated by 50 years. You know, Brittany was kind of an art girl. Before the crime, one of her goals was to go to Korea or Japan to study manga and anime. She was really artistic, and she found her friend group with a bunch of kind of queer art emo kids in the high school there. You know, she was a bright girl. She was like taunted on this. She always had her nose in a book, and she'd be like bullied on the school bus. And she even picked fights. I didn't put this in the book, but she picked fights with the bully girls who like beat the shit out of the little kids, the little weak kids. So when she was in a position to do so, she would take on the biggest bullies. And Brittany was not a fighter. She was like a skinny little weedy girl who didn't know how to fight. She was a hair puller. So she would always lose these fights. And I remember doing the same thing when I was 12 years old, you know, taking on, quote, Tiny, the biggest, meanest girl in the school who bullied all the little kids. You know, and the whole school showed up to watch this fight, you know, which Tiny ended within 2 minutes. So I felt really close to Brittany, and we began kind of a friendship and a correspondence that continued for quite a while, and I was able to send her art books and other materials while she was in prison.
You mentioned In Cold Blood and The Executioner's Song. Were those, even if you didn't write that kind of book, were those models for this book, or were there other things? Because it reminded me somewhat of Gary Indiana's 3 Month Fever, somewhat, and it's sort of contemporaneous.
They were powerful models,
Yeah.
powerful models. The Executioner's Song by Norman Mailer is basically like a 1970s update of what Capote did for 1950s America within Cold Blood. I mean, what makes both of those books great, besides the sort of deep, intimate character portraits that they give, is that there's so much, the crime captures the zeitgeist of America in those years. And, you know, I think what was brilliant and shocking in the Capote book, or one of the things, was the kind of homosexual subtext of the relationship between the two killers, Perry and Dick. And, you know, the sort of, it's just like throwing a bomb into the middle of this kind of bland Americana landscape that was the media depiction of America. Everybody knew that other things were happening in the cities, that there was another more cosmopolitan life, and this crime just kind of shoved that fact in front of people's noses. And I think that's a lot of what Capote was working with in the book. And the Gary Gilmore story and The Executioner's Song, a lot of what Mailer was working with was the fallout of the counterculture in the U.S., the fallout of the counterculture become grunge and sleaze and gun violence and scams. I mean, it's really brilliant. Both of them are brilliant books.
Were there other things, though, that influenced you? Like, are you a true crime devotee? Like, do you listen to podcasts? Do you watch films? Yeah.
Not a whole lot of it, but I just read a really amazing book by a friend, the writer Matt Kessler, that's going to come out in the spring, called Wiregrass. He's Southern. He's from Alabama. He grew up there, and he followed a murder that was extremely racially polarized. He followed this murder. Well, he fought it for the murder itself spanned 20 years. He wasn't on it for that long a time because it was a cold case, and they dug it up out of nowhere to pin on this guy. It's a really great book, so that'll be coming out soon.
Yeah, I'll look for it. You write also in the book, this is a thought that occurs to Kat in 2019. Since Trump's election and the Twitterization of everything, she'd started to wonder if there was even a point to writing books anymore, and who for. Did you, I know that's Kat's thinking, and I don't want to completely, equate you and Kat, but is that a thought that you share or do share?
Well, okay, so, this moment of total debasement of the culture, right? There was this Trump point one, when it was kind of more cultural and, consciousness as opposed to kind of full-on Nazi brutality in the streets. Trump 1.0 was about, the name-calling and the bullying and the slagging off of people, which shocked me, and shocked me even more when I thought that the reaction of the cultural world would be to do a 180 on that and to reject anything to do with that. But in fact, people embrace the mean-spiritedness of Twitter and, love to cancel and call each other out and slag each other off on Twitter. Getting a mean thing in on Twitter would be, make somebody memorable for a week or a month. So that kind of shocked me. And always when you write, even if you're not thinking of the readers the moment that you're writing the book in the room, in the long term you're doing it for a reason. It's very hard to write a book, and you're doing it because you feel that there's a possibility of an audience, of communicating with an audience. And when this started to happen, this Twitterization, I'm like, who is this audience? And do I even want to talk to these people? Is there even a conversation to be had at this point? And if there isn't, then what's the point of writing a book?
And things have gone much further, obviously. The book hits differently now. Given the horrific state violence that we've seen in Minneapolis and Minnesota. And I know you're writing on a much different part of Minnesota that's quite far from Minneapolis. But can you talk maybe a bit about the relationship between poverty and violence and despair that you write about in the region, and how someone like a Trump has weaponized that?
Yeah.
Is that, you go back to Minnesota now? Have you been back to the state at all recently?
Do what?
Have you been back to Minnesota at all recently?
I haven't been back to Minnesota since the book, no.
Okay.
I was supposed to go to Minneapolis in a couple of weeks, but that got canceled for various reasons.
Yeah.
The book has circulated somewhat among
Yeah.
people in northern Minnesota,
Yeah.
and it's been very positive. Everyone who's read the book up there has been really happy with the way that they're depicted.
Yeah, good. And the kids, have they read the book? The kids that you write about, have they read it? And they
Oh, the Paul character?
Paul,
Yeah.
well, Paul and the kids, Brittany, the others.
I'm in constant contact with the accomplice. I send him money every month, and he's doing college classes, and we write back and forth at least once a week and talk on the phone. But I can't get him the book because they restrict what goes into the prison. You have to order it from a certain supplier. And so far, I think until the book is out in paperback, it won't be available. So I can't send the book. But I sent it to some friends of the kids. And, they've been very happy with it. But the question about the violence, there's two parts to it. The violence of these crimes was very much drug-related. You really can't pin it down to anything else. But I don't know if you picked up on this. In the second part that I read, I just slipped in the reference to the mother's gun on the refrigerator. That's just such a normal fact of American life now, the mother's gun on the refrigerator. But if the mother didn't have a gun on the refrigerator, none of this would have happened. They all would have gotten bored and gone home. It wouldn't, the gun was a prop. It was like, what is the Chekhov thing? Chekhov's what? Yeah. If it's there, it's got to go off by the end of the third act. So that the drug thing is huge, but just the culture of violence now and the actual, perpetration of violence in the street is horrifying. I was in the march in LA that ended up on Friday at the detention center, and it ended with tear gas. That's just unheard of. It was a nonviolent demonstration.
Yeah, it's horrible, obviously. I think we have time for a couple more questions from me, and then we'll turn it over to everybody out there. This is your first novel in almost 15 years, is that correct? Almost, since Summer of Hate was
2012.
Right, so in between you wrote a biography of Kathy Acker. Did researching and writing that book, that biography, change your writing, how you research and how you approach fiction?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a funny question that you asked, Jason, because we're the two biographers of Kathy Acker.
Didn't want to mention it, but
and we
yes,
were
yeah.
communicating at the
Yeah,
time,
yeah,
too.
Yeah.
But, I mean, for myself, I definitely learned by doing the Acker biography how to write a single sentence with 3 footnotes. You know, like, you gather so many sources, and the book is so much a matter of synthesizing the sources. I mean, did you find that too?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So that you gather the sources and gather them and live with them until you can synthesize almost without thinking about them. They become, you know, part of your repertoire. The sources are your repertoire that you compose something out of.
Mm-hmm.
So I did think when I went into researching part 3, it's like, oh, okay, I know how to do this.
Right,
I know
yeah.
how to do 120 interviews and maybe synthesize them into some form at the end of it.
Yeah. And you know how to do an investigation, right? I mean, when you're writing your Acker book, you hired a private investigator, right, to do some research for you. So
Right.
this is
I mean,
not
I wasn't
unfamiliar
even
territory
doing the
for you.
definitive
Yeah.
biography that
Yeah.
you did. I was
No.
doing more of a literary biography, but it still was so much research.
Yeah, no, it is for sure. Let me just end with one question. I have to bring up the A word, autofiction. You are, for better or for worse, the doyenne of American autofiction, and I understand your objections to the word, to the term. But you know, when you're writing about yourself so openly, you inevitably invite questions about your own life and the fiction's fidelity to it, which must be so tedious for you at this point. Like, you must be so tired of talking about where Chris Kraus begins and where Cat Green ends, or like.
I see, Kat is not the protagonist of this book at all. She's a secondary character. So I really, I don't know why people particularly seem to fixate on that aspect of my books to such a degree. Because for the last several books, my character is there kind of as a witness or a narrator, but it's very much about the other people in her orbit. Mm-hmm. This book is about the kids, and in the part 1, it's much more about the parents, and in part 2, it's much more about the alcoholic spouse. Mm-hmm. It's much more about these other characters. So, I mean, I write from my life, but I don't write about my life per se. It's like where my life takes me that enables me to see certain things. I mean, part of a book is. Someone made this beautiful metaphor about a book being like an explorer going to another region and bringing something back. And I really feel that about writing. You're going to another zone, another realm of experience, and bringing it back or reporting on it. Well, I mean, obviously I'm there, I'm there as a witness, but I think all books, whether they're nonfiction or fiction, if they're in any way literary, have something of the writer in them. I mean, no matter how veiled or oblique that might be, something of the writer's life or of the writer's soul is in the book. So, yeah, the autofiction thing has never resonated with me. There's this kind of terrible writer in France. Maybe some of you have read him, Edouard Carrière. He's like
Did
the
you say
famous...
terrible writer, is that what you said?
Yeah. He's the famous kind of French autofiction writer, and he writes about his life as a successful middle-class novelist over and over and over again. I mean, is that autofiction? If that is, I don't want to have anything to do with it. The writer William S. Burroughs, I found a great quote by him recently when I was researching something else. Someone else kind of tried to pin that on him, and he said, "Everything I write is autobiography, and everything I write is fiction."